Twin Blades, acolytes, friends, and passers-by. My name is Ruin. Welcome to the Strim. How's it going? Hope your Monday was bearable. Is bearable. I would say was, thinking, the day's over. We're wrapping it up. We are home from work. We are doing whatever the heck we want, chilling out in the evening, but technically the day is not over. Only partially gone. But yeah, how's it going? How's tings? My day was definitely a Monday. It was busy AF. So many calls that I took today. I guess for anybody who doesn't know, I work on a service desk, an IT service desk. So calls and tickets and yeah, all kinds of technical issues. It was a day, let me tell you. But we are now here on Magic Monday Madness to go through some Commander decks. Because we like Commander. I like Commander. Hopefully you like Commander. If you don't like Commander, then you may not like the stream. We are also on Just Chatting because technically we're not actually playing anything today. We are wholly in the Theorycraft exploration, diving into cards and effects and whatnots. This is what I do in my free time. I am a Commander deck builder. If you guys remember, I guess I have it pulled up. I can show you actually. Hold on. Let me go ahead and go to the live screen. Let me actually do the screen capture rather than the game capture. And realize that I am in wholeheartedly the wrong place for this. But here we go. my camera at least. So these are my 4 decks that I currently play and have built. Counting on Death, this is the modified version of the Atraxa deck that was released as Commander product a couple years ago now. Feline Ferocity, which is my modified deck of the Cat Tribal, which was also a Commander product that I have now modified. I also want to modify that even further by changing the Commander and adding black to the green and white. Life Drain, I like to think of as my first deck that I really ever truly built that was my own. It is a blue, white, black deck that completely centers around draining the life of your opponents. Mael's Aria of Thunder is getting big dudes on the battlefield. It is a white, green, red deck. And then Nature's Vengeance is a modified version of the Lord Windgrace deck that was also Commander product several years back. And it is land centered. So lands entering the battlefield trigger effects, or amount of lands are beneficial. You playing extra lands each turn is beneficial. Stuff like that. These are decks that I have built for friends and acquaintances that I just have built in this utility that I use and have kept them. So a few of these are for multiple people. A few of them are for the same person, but I made multiple decks for them. But yeah, these are decks that I have put together or are theory crafting for my own collection in the future. This one was one chipping away is the artist Chippy. Was a fairly prolific I honestly don't know much about the individual. But the entire deck, other than the commanders, actually, their partner commander, it's a 4-color deck. The entire deck, other than the commanders, are art by that artist. All of the creatures, everything, even the lands. because Chippy did every land except for mountain. So it is a 4-color deck that doesn't have red. Um, yeah, whatever. Um, and then these are the decks that I built for middle class commander. So these are the ones that are only uncommon rarity cards. And then we have Dungeons of Death, which is what we're going to actually dig through today. So this is when Laggy redeemed the channel point reward for his deck. I told him when he got because he got all 4 of this year's D&D Forgotten Realms commander products, all 4 decks. I told him one of the ones that you keep for yourself, I will go ahead and mod for you. And that'll be me building you the deck, essentially. So the commander for the deck is this gal right here. And I'll go ahead and make this screen a little bit bigger. Sephris of the Hidden Ways. Let me actually check and make sure that you can see that in any shape of the imagination here. So yeah, if you full screen, that's pretty nice. What if I don't full screen mute tab just in case? Yeah, that's decent. Especially if you turn chat off for your guys' view. Okay, so we'll stick with this. So as you will note here, I do, and actually let me go ahead and get some music going because just something in the background so that it's not just me listening to myself or you listening directly to me, because it's going to be a lot of me and I currently apologize for that. I assume this is going to kick up here in a second. But not, I can adjust it. Whatever. Anyway, we got something in the background at least. So, Sephris of the Hidden Ways. She is a blue, white, black for 2/3 human wizard. It does actually kick up. That says whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, venture into the dungeon. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then she also has Create Undead. Whenever you complete a dungeon, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Okay. So, in my opinion, I have never been a big fan of dungeons since they released. Dungeons are cards. There are 3 different dungeons. They are cards that are essentially not cards because they have their own section of the battlefield. They are out of play. They cannot be interacted with by any card effects other than you triggering the venture, which moves you farther. But the dungeon. Here we go. Like I said, there's 3 different dungeons. So these are the 3 dungeons. I'm gonna try and make bigger, but it doesn't look like I'm gonna have that ability. Can I just pull it here? You're gonna give me all the rules. Just give me the picture. Anyway, so when you venture, you enter the first room or the next room. You basically change your next room when you venture forth into the dungeon. And when you venture, then you trigger whatever event is within that room. So basically, the Dungeon of the Mad Mage is the longest, and Lost Mine of Phandelver and Tomb of Annihilation are the same amount of rooms. But those are the things that were released for this set. There's a new card type, new run through, and it's okay. I mean, you really have to have a deck that is centered around that to make it worthwhile, in my opinion. So reading her kind of makes the deck make a little bit more sense. I'm thinking that because of that, she is like this deck is going to have a lot of dungeon triggers. It's going to have quite a few dungeon payoffs. Now that I actually see her ability fully, I will say that it makes sense why there is so much removal in this deck and so much recursion in this deck. But I think hey, Glenn. Thanks for the resub. Now you are the king of subs. There you are. Success. Welcome back. But yeah, so with Sephiroth, I'm thinking there's a lot of stuff that, seeing her ability, there's going to be things that reflect her ability. We'll go through the cards, but I want to say that I was wholly disappointed in that it does not do what I was expecting it to. Anyway, so in Commander Product, usually if there is a deck, there is at least one other alternate commander that you could technically swap the main commander for. So you can put the main commander into the 99 and take that card and use it as your actual commander. So your other option in this deck, the only other option that gives you all three colors, is Nihilor, who is a horror 3/5 legendary creature for 2 generic white, blue, black, who says whenever he enters the battlefield, or they enter the battlefield, for each opponent, tap up to 1 untapped creature you control, and when you do, gain control of target creature that player controls with power less than or equal to the tapped creature's power for as long as you control Nihilor. Whenever you attack with the creature an opponent controls, you gain 2 life, and that player loses 2 life. So, interesting card. Very much leaning more towards the stealing your opponent's things type idea. But it only triggers when it enters the battlefield, which is an interesting limitation. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what would you use for this? You could bounce it, but when you bounce it, it's technically leaving the battlefield. So your cards that you've stolen are now going back to their owner's playing field. Because it doesn't say it returns it to their hands. It's just returned to the player's control. So I need to look more into how that whole thing works, whether bouncing, the interaction with this card and bouncing, interaction with this card, and flickering, which is technically it exiles itself and then comes back automatically. But that is the other commander in this deck. And again, I'm thinking, okay, well, since this is the other option, then maybe there's some sort of suite of stealing your opponent's items, stealing your opponent's, well, at least specifically creatures, because that's what Nihilor does. Anyway, you will also notice that both of these cards hopefully you will notice that both of these cards have a small colored outline. We will come to that. But let's go through the rest of the deck. So these are the creatures. We have 34 creatures, including the commanders. I'm just giving you the stats of the deck. We have Ashen Rider, which is one of the Archons, which are usually big, beefy cards, usually can fly. But they carry a hefty cost. This is an 8-drop for a 5/5 flyer. But when it enters the battlefield or dies, so you get 2 triggers on this puppy, you exile target permanent. So it can hit anything, as long as it's a permanent. Decent card, a little pricey, but that's because it's exiling something when it comes in and leaves. So it's okay. I mean, it's basically a late game card that by that time your opponent is probably having, or opponents have good targets for it. So it's decent. Baleful Strix is a great low drop for Dimir, which is the blue-black. Great creature. 2-drop for a 1/1, but it has Flying and Death Touch. And when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Awesome. Decent card all the way around. Great stats for the cost. It's thumbs up. Burnished Heart. You'll find this one in quite a few decks just because of the ramp. Comes in as a 2/2 for 3. It's an artifact. 3 colorless. And then for 3 colorless again, and sacking it, search your library for 2 basic lands and put them on the battlefield. Tap, shuffle your library. Decent ramp spell. Cataclysmic Gearhulk. There's actually a line of Gearhulks, so there's 1 in each color. Cataclysmic comes in for 5 as a 4/5 with Vigilance. Decent stats. And when it enters the battlefield, each player, including yourself, chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, and you sacrifice the rest. So this is a pseudo board wipe for everybody. You're at least limiting the resources of your opponents, and if you don't have that, or like I say, there is quite a bit of recursion in this deck, so you're not too worried about it, although the recursion in here is mainly creature-based. Champion of Wits is a 3-drop for a Naga Wizard, 2/1. Enters the battlefield, you can draw cards equal to its power, which is 2 when you first play it. And if you do, you discard 2 cards. So this is a 2-card loot. Yes, because loot is draw, then discard. The other way is a different name. And then it has Eternalize. So for 5 blue, which is a little pricey. But by that time, you're probably farther in the game and you have more mana to play with. If you pay that cost, you can exile the card out of your graveyard, and it comes back as a 4/4 zombie Naga Wizard rather than its normal Naga Wizard, and it's a black token. You can only do that as a sorcery, but it comes in with its ability. So you're drawing 4 cards, and you're only having to discard 2 at that point. So it's might be a little on the pricey side, but it's a blue card, and blue cards usually tend to roll a little high. Okay. Clay Golem, new card for this set. 4-drop for a 4/4. Decent. Doesn't really do anything. It's basically a vanilla until you pay 6. And then you can roll a d8, and it has Monstrosity X, where X is the result. And Monstrosity is you put that number of 1/1 counters on him. So it goes from a 4/4 to however many counters. So, if you get an 8, he becomes 12/12. Which isn't bad for 10 mana. But he also has Berserk. So when it becomes monstrous, when you activate that, you can destroy any target permanent. So that includes lands, as well as, enchantments, anything, basically. Um, Cloud Blazer is the next one. Is an okay card. You usually sometimes see it in blue-white flyers. Um, it's a little pricey for a 2/2 human scout with flying, but when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and you draw 2 cards. So I would liken this to Mole Drifter, is what I thought of automatically, which is also in this deck. So we can skip down to it. So for 5 mana, it's a 2/2 flying elemental, which I didn't realize that it was a 5 drop as well. So they both have the same cost for the same 2/2 flyer. And when this one enters the battlefield, you just draw 2 cards. But you can also evoke this one, where you can pay the 3, and if you do, it enters the battlefield and then automatically sacks itself. So you basically pay 3 for the draw 2 cards. And if you have, I guess, something that benefits off of your creature dying, I think technically that kicks it off. If I know my magic ruling. Curator of Mysteries is the next one. A 4-drop for a 4/4 flying Sphinx. Decent stats. Says whenever you cycle or discard a card, scry 1. And it also has cycling for a blue mana. I do not know why this card is in this deck. I will say that right now. There is no other cycling, and there's not that much card draw to where you're going to overload your hand and have to discard. And there are no cards that I remember in this deck that force you to discard. Well, I take that back. Technically, Champion Wits discards. So there may be a few, but this could easily be filled by something that would more behoove you and be a better option in this deck. I'm just saying. Next card, Doomed Necromancer. Is a human cleric mercenary for 3 and is a 2/2. You can pay a black, tap it. You have arrived! Welcome, Tiger. We are going through the wizard deck for Sean. We're just doing an analysis on the deck, and then we'll come back after today, later, after I've had a chance to actually run through this and see what modifications I want to do. So we're just looking at the deck currently. You can pay a black, tap it, sack Doomed Necromancer, and you return target creature card from your graveyard to your battlefield. Okay, that's one of the recursion options that I was talking about. Eternal Dragon is a 7-drop for a 5/5 flying dragon spirit. For 3/4/5, 3 and 2 white, you can return it from the graveyard to your hand and activate the ability only during your upkeep. So at the beginning of your turn, you've just used 5 of the mana that you just untapped. Or you can plain cycle it, which basically means you can pay 2 and discard this card and go find a plains. Hama Pashar, a Ruin Seeker, is a human wizard. 3 for 2/3. Room abilities of dungeons you own trigger an additional time. So this is one of the cards in the deck that I was expecting because it's dungeon centered. So each time you go into a room, that effect essentially triggers twice, is what she does if she's on the battlefield. Hostage Taker. 4-drop for a 2/3 human pirate. When it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any mana type, to cast the spell. So this is more the Nihilor route, where I'm thinking, you're stealing your opponent's stuff. And it's a decent card. Honestly, when it was in Standard, it was run quite a bit. Karmic Guide. Honestly, a fairly well-known card. Used in quite a few decks. 3 3 and 2 white for a 2/2 Angel Spirit. Kind of pricey, but has flying and protection from black. And then it has an echo cost. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you either have to pay that cost or she dies. You sacrifice it, technically. But when she enters the battlefield, target creature card from your graveyard, and you can bring it back to the battlefield. Not bad. It's usually used as a recursion trigger to bring stuff back from the graveyard repeatedly, because you bring her back usually for free because she's a 2/2. And then when she enters the battlefield, then you're bringing another thing back on her wing feathers, on her tail wing, however you want to look at that, say that, along with her. So it's pretty valuable card, honestly, especially in recursion theories like that. Merfolk Looter. Literally merfolk that you tap, draw a card, discard a card. He loots. Makes sense. He's called Merfolk Looter. It's okay. I mean, you do you. If you like loot, if you've got something that triggers off of drawing a card or discarding a card, by all means. Okay, so we're making more sense, I guess, on the Curator of Mysteries. So, because there is a little bit of looting in this deck. I still don't think there's enough in the discard or the looting to really make that card worthwhile, but whatever. Meteor Golem. 7 colorless for a 3/3 golem. But when it enters the battlefield, you can destroy any target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So, removal on a stick. Midnight Pathlighter. New card for this set. Creatures you control can't be blocked except by legendary creatures. Honestly, not a bad ability at all. Especially stapled to a 2/3 for 4. Perfectly fine. But it also has, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So it's one of our cards that go with Sephris in the dungeon theme. Min, Wily Illusionist. 3-drop for a 1/3 gnome wizard. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token. With this creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. Whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. This is another one that I'm just like, I don't really know why this card is in this deck. I can think of one illusion card in the deck off the top of my head after looking through this a little bit. We haven't come to it yet. But again, this is one that I'm just like, okay, sure. We already talked about Muldrifter. Murder of Crows, 5-drop for a 4/4 flyer. It says whenever another creature dies, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So, another looter for trigger on death. Okay. I personally would rather keep cards than discard them off of stuff, but that's just me. Necrotic Sliver, 3-drop for a 2/2 sliver, which normally if you see slivers, you're thinking, okay, we must have a sliver suite. So there's a good group of slivers in these creatures that we have in this deck. Because it says, all slivers have pay 3, sacrifice this creature, destroy target permanent. I will let you know now, this is the only sliver in the deck. So, it's a removal spell by itself. I mean, you can recur it through a lot of the card effects if you're needing to pot shot something and remove permanents from the field. But to me, this is kind of a flavor loss. But whatever. Here we go. Obsessive Stitcher. 3-drop for a 0/3. draw a card, then discard a card. So she loots. And then for 2 black, I almost said green, black, blue, tap, sack her, then return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So another recursion card. Here's the illusion that I was talking about. Oh, next to another illusion. Okay, so we have 2 in the deck. Phantasmal Image is a 2-drop that literally comes in as any creature on the battlefield, except that when it's targeted by a dispel or an ability, you have to sack it. But it does come in as anything else on the battlefield currently. Phantom Steed is an interesting card. New card from the set. 4-drop for a 4/3 Horse Illusion with Flash, which basically means you can play it at any, basically as an instant spell. So whenever you have priority, you can play this card, whether it be your turn or not. When it enters the battlefield, you exile another target creature that you control until Phantom Steed leaves the battlefield. Whenever Phantom Steed attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of the exiled creature, except it's an illusion in addition to its other types. Sack that token at the end of combat. Excuse me. So I thought about like putting the Nihilor underneath this thing, and technically on the attack step, you're creating another version of it, so you could, I guess, technically steal your opponent's blockers at that point if you have creatures that have equal to or greater than the power of the creatures that you're targeting. But then I'm thinking, then they just go away at the end of the turn, and you also lose if you had any on the battlefield anyway, because it's exiled underneath the steed. So maybe it's an interesting card if you have something that has an enter this battlefield ETB effect. Might not be a bad idea or a bad option, especially like put Plague Crafter underneath it. I don't recommend that. Well, actually, I don't not recommend that, because technically you could just sack Plague Crafter to itself and then force all of your opponents to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker every attack step. Not a terrible idea or option. Radiant Solar, new card, Angel, 3/6 for 6. Flying and lifelink. We like the lifelink. I'm a sucker for lifelink. What can I say? Whenever this card or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, venture into the dungeon. And then you can discard the card, venture into the dungeon, and gain 3 life without having to pay the 6 mana cost. Not bad. I mean, honestly, not bad in general, even without the dungeon clause in here. But one of the cards that have that theme. Reassembling Skeleton is reprinted multiple times. 2-drop for a 1/1 Skeleton Warrior, but you can pay the same amount that it casts to cost him, and you bring it back from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it's basically just a returning blocker, usually is what it's used for. Ronom Unicorn is apparently from an earlier set, but I can't say that I'm familiar with it. It was a common in whatever set it was. But 2 for a 2/2 unicorn, you can sacrifice it and destroy a target enchantment. Pretty limited in its removal, but I guess it's a removal spell. Shriekmaw is honestly a fairly well-known elemental. 5-drop for a 3/2 with Fear. Like the Mole Drifter, also has Evoke, to where you can have it hit the battlefield and it automatically sacks itself if you don't want to pay the 5. Fear is it can't be blocked except by artifact or black creatures. And then when it enters the battlefield, destroy a non-artifact, non-black creature. And then we have Sad Robot, Solemn Simulacrum, for a 4-drop for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then when it dies, you can draw a card. Honestly, it's a great card. Usually run in quite a few decks, just for the fact that it gives you ramp as well as gives you card draw. Sun Titan, fairly popular card. 6/6 for 6, Vigilance Giant. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can return a target permanent card with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Used a lot in white weenie decks, used a lot in basically anything that centers around returning stuff repeatedly. Sunblast Angel, new card for this set. 4/5 for 6. Flying. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy all tapped creatures. Conditional removal. Not a terrible option, I guess, towards the later turns of the game. And then you have Wall of Omens, 2 for a 0/4 defender. When Wall of Omens enters the battlefield, draw a card. It's okay. It's a blocker. You don't really have much in the way of power in this deck, so 0/4s aren't going to be a bad idea. Instance, Despark, 2 for exile target permanent with CMC 4 or greater. Not bad for removing basically any permanent that is usually going to be some sort of threat. Forbidden Alchemy, look at top 4 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the rest in your graveyard, and then you have flashback, so you can play it from your graveyard and then exile it again. That seems to be, to me, you're throwing a lot in the graveyard. Now, I realize there's quite a bit of recursion in this deck, so I guess that is to be expected. Grave Endeavor is a 7-drop that says, roll 2d10s, choose one result. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to that result. Then each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the other result. So you get a choice of how many counters you're putting on the creature you're targeting, and then you also get a choice on how much life you are gaining and they are losing. Revivify, 3 for an instant. Roll a d20 and add the number of creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So that's a numerical value. 1 through 14, return all creature cards in the graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn to your hand, or 15 plus, return those cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Not a bad option if you have just board wiped, or somebody has just board wiped and you had a good amount of stuff on the battlefield. Otherwise, it's not a too terribly great card. With the stipulation that it has to be this turn. It's kind of the meh part of that card, honestly. Swords to Plowshares, basically a ubiquitous card in any white commander deck. 1 white, exile target creature, its control gains life equal to its power. Utter End, another staple. 4 for exile target non-land permanent. And then the last instant card in this deck is Vanish into Memory. For exile target creature, you draw cards equal to that creature's power, At the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control, and if you do, discard cards equal to that creature's toughness. I am not really a fan of this card at all. Like, if it was exile target creatures, you draw cards equal to that creature's power. Done. End. Fine. Toast. Awesome. I would pay 4 for that. But, at the beginning of your next upkeep, you're returning the card back to the battlefield under their owner's control, and then you're discarding cards either equal to, most likely, the amount that you drew into your graveyard. Now, again, this is technically has a decent recursion for creatures, sweet in it, but maybe it's just like that mentality is just not my cup of tea. But anyway, Arcane Endeavor. Roll 2d8, choose one result for 7 here. Draw cards equal to that result, and then you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to the other result from your hand without paying its mana cost. Not a bad card. Instant or sorcery. I mean, if you're running a good suite of instants or sorceries, this is not bad. If you're not, then you might just whiff. And if you don't have anything really worthwhile in your hand, then you've paid 7 mana for not a whole lot. And in this deck, you have 7 instants and 5 sorceries to be had. So I don't know that I see this really working for you, at least in this deck. Extract Brain. X, blue-black. Target opponent chooses X cards from their hand. Look at those cards. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. So the detraction on this one is, they have the choice. If you just pay X equal to the cards in their hand, then it doesn't matter. You have the choice. So it just kind of depends upon whether you want to pay the mana for their entire hand or not. If you do, decent card. If you don't have the mana for it, then this just sits in your hand until you do, I guess, because there's no point in playing when you don't have that amount. Necromantic Selection. 4 black, black, black. Destroy all creatures. Will then return a creature card put into a graveyard this way onto the battlefield under your control. It's a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And then you exile this card. Board wipe with upside. So, not terrible. It's, I'd say it's a little overcosted, but you're paying the extra cost because you're literally able to target any creature that was removed. Well, yeah, any creature that was removed from that board wipe, because it specifies to that board wipe, and not any card in any graveyard, and you can put it back on the battlefield. Well, creature card. But yeah. Not bad. Unbury Wights. 5 for return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Another recursion spell. Also has flashback, so you can technically do this twice. Victimize. Honestly seen every now and then. 3, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. Sack a creature. And if you do, return those chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. Not bad. Artifacts. Arcane Signet. For 2, tap 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, which, for both of your options here, is blue, black, or white, which is basically everything you would need. Bucknard's Everfull Purse. New card. 2 drop, and then you pay 1 and tap it. Roll a d4, create a number of treasure tokens. equal to the result. The player to your right then gains control of Bucknard's Everfull Purse. So you're spreading possible mana advantage. Treasure taps you tap it and sack it, and it gives you any color mana, one of any color mana. So you're possibly ramping your opponents with this card, but it's a D4, so it's probably only going to give you or give your opponents an extra card or extra play. I don't know. That one's kind of... I'm not a big fan of passing cards around, so it's okay. Commander Sphere, 3-drop, taps for any mana in your commander's color identity, and you can also sack it and draw a card. Decent commander staple. Component Pouch, 3-drop, new card again. Remove a counter from Component Pouch, add 2 mana of different colors. Tap it, you can roll a d20, 1 through 9, add a counter on it. 10 through 20, put 2 counters on it. Not bad. Honestly, you kind of play the randomness of having to roll a dice, but not terrible. The variability of the colors also helps, honestly. Dungeon Map, new card. Add 1 colorless, or 3, tap, venture into the dungeon. Activate only as a sorcery. So if you're a dungeon deck, this is another one of those themed cards. Fellwar Stone, 2-drop for add 1 mana of any color a land an opponent controls would produce. It's an interesting card. At the very least, it gives you 1 mana of anything. Of colorless, I mean. Immovable Rod, white, for you may choose not to untap it during your untap step. Whenever it becomes untapped, venture into the dungeon. For 3 and a white and tap, for as long as Immovable Rod remains tapped, another target permanent loses all abilities and can't attack or block. So it's pacifism literally on a stick, because it is a rod. It is very much higher costed. Because I'm pretty sure pacifism is just a 3 I think it's a 3-drop. 2 and a white, maybe 3 and a white, might be 4. But either way, I don't know. I would rather just run the pacifism myself. Spells out there that destroy artifacts usually can destroy artifact or enchantments, so it's not like you're getting around those spells by making it an artifact rather than an enchantment. So yeah. Lightning Greaves, one of the best equipments, staples in Commander. 2-drop for an equipment that equips for 0. Equipped creature gains haste and shroud. So they can attack automatically when you play them rather than having summoning sickness. And they cannot be targeted by spells or abilities that opponents or you, so be aware of that, you cannot target your own card while this is equipped. But the equipped cost of 0 makes that not that big of a deal. Rod of Absorption, new card. 2 and a black, 2 and a blue. For whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard as it resolves. X, tap. Sacrifice this card. You may cast any number of spells from among cards exiled with Rod of Absorption with total mana X or less without paying their mana costs. Honestly, that's a decent card. On the verge of being a really good card. Especially since it's just a 3 that can just sit there and at the very least, you're removing those cards if you're going up against somebody who is a sorcery or instant type deck, to where that's the theme. This just hoses them because it exiles them rather than putting them into their graveyard. So not a bad card. Sol Ring. It's Sol Ring. Taps for 2 colorless for 1. Always an include in Commander. Wand of Orcus. New card. 2 and a black for an artifact equipment. Legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and it has equip cost of 3. So in this deck, you basically have to make your own zombies. I think there is 1 zombie card in the actual creature slots, and then you have that 1 card that brings back something as a zombie. So the wand is going to have to generate its own zombies to give any it and zombies you control Death Touch until end of turn. But honestly, if you're just generating those, then you have a lot of black zombie creature tokens that have Death Touch. But you would have to keep this back to block with it. I don't know. That's going to be kind of odd. But interesting card. Wayfarer's Bauble. 1 for an artifact that you have to pay 2 and tap, then sack it, and you can go look for a basic land card and put that card, on the battlefield tap. Very slow and one of the probably more inefficient mana rocks out there. I say slow. I guess not necessarily slow, but it is one of the more inefficient mana rocks out there, I guess. 3 enchantments in this entire deck. Minimus Containment, which is a new card. Enchant non-land permanent. That permanent is now a treasure artifact that says tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color. And then it loses all of its other abilities. So it's a pacifism that basically turns it into a... well, I guess it's not really pacifism. It literally is a wipe to where you're containing whatever permanent it is, turns off all of its abilities, and makes it a treasure. Propaganda. 3-drop for creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 colorless for each creature they control that is attacking you. Decent card, especially in stuff to where you're not necessarily being the aggressor, and you kind of want to just sit back and set up whatever your deck wants to do. Pretty decent staple in Commander, honestly. Thorough Investigation. Enchantment for 3. Whenever you attack, investigate, which is where you create a colorless clue artifact token that has, and clues are pay 2, sacrifice, and draw a card. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, venture into the dungeon. So, another one of the dungeon card suites. And then lands. I don't think I'm going to go specifically through the lands. You have a couple of the bounce lands, which I think is always really a staple in Commander. You have a few check lands where they're checking. Oh, sorry, no, this is one of the reveal lands. Probably not something I would include because you're not necessarily always going to have an island or a swamp in your hand. I would rather it be a check land. These are filter lands where you have to tap some sort of mana into it to actually get colored mana out. Command Tower is a staple. Arcane Sanctum, I would say, is a staple for this deck because it is those 3 colors. Esper Panorama is a fetch land. But it's one of the slow fetches to where it taps for colorless, and then you can pay a colorless and then sack it, and then you can search for any of the 3 colors in this deck. Evolving Wilds, your ubiquitous fetch land that literally just goes and finds a basic land. Exotic Orchard, taps for any color that your opponents have. Cryoreach Sanctum, each player draws a card and then discards a card, so loots for everybody. High Market, sacrifice creature, gain a life, taps for colorless. Nimbus Maze is a perfectly fine include in this deck. It just checks to see whether you have an island or a plains, and then allows you to tap the land for those colors. Another bounce land. This is one of the reveal lands. These are one of the lands that actually has the card or land type attached to them. These aren't bad. These also get searched by the fetch lands, the quick fetches, where you have to pay the life. So these are not bad. I honestly would possibly leave them in here. Terramorphic Expand is literally the same thing that Evolving Wilds is. And then the Thriving cards are new. So they enter tapped, and you have to choose another color other than what it already taps for, and then it can tap for that color or what it obviously already taps for. And all 3 of the equivalent one is here. So so now I kind of run through and give you why some of these cards were outlined. So the I went through and just basically broke it down. So purple was a stealing or copy item, which would kind of go with Nihilor. So there are 4 of those. That's Nihilor itself, the Hostage Taker, Phantom Steed, which was the horse illusion, and then the Phantasmal Image. So anything that's so literally 4 cards that were revolved around stealing or copying your opponent's stuffs, which is kind of what Nihilor is thematically headed into. The loot was a very kind of sub-theme. You have 5 cards of those. The land, the Merfolk Looter, the Murder of Crows, the Obsessive Stitcher, and then the Forbidden Alchemy, which was kind of a costly loot, but yeah. So 5 on those. And then you had the dungeon theme, which is what Sephris was to begin with. And honestly, there are only 7 cards in this entire deck that deal with dungeons. I was honestly pretty disappointed in that is literally all. Like, I realize that if you're playing the deck the way that, like, you basically don't care about killing anything on your field, then you can go through the dungeon. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, in a commander game, you going through the dungeon is not going to give you all that much advantage. So, I mean, yes, some of these cards are decent. Like Midnight Pathlighter is decent because you know, creatures you control can't be blocked except by legendary creatures. That's honestly decent. What's the word? I mean, advantage, but that's not the word that I want. Radiant Solar, which is a 3/6 flying lifelink. Honestly, a decent blocker with lifelink. Decent card. Thorough Investigation, just being able to generate clues is not bad, you know. Generation of card advantage. Had green marked as ramp. Not necessarily ramp, but at least mana generation of some sort. That is 9 cards, and they are all artifacts in this deck. That's usually fairly common, in something that doesn't have green. You're not going to have much that's outside of green that's going to be able to even, generate you mana or ramp advantage there. The return suite I put as gray. That is 9. There are 9 cards that return things. I will say that 2 of them are themselves, which is the reassembling skeleton and the eternal dragon. The eternal dragon, in my opinion, is not a great card. It is too costly for what it is. And if you need a 5/5 flyer, just get a stinking 5/5 flyer with a better ability. Like, come on. But a lot of these either enter the battlefield or sack themselves or have you sack something else to bring back items. But that's your recursion suite, which is okay. I mean, honestly, that's 7 cards, so probably not as much as you really want to go to be as fluid in just wiping your board as you really want, but it's okay. Card draw and advantage. Card advantage. I've got 8 cards here in that. That's, Baleful Strix, when it enters, draw a card. Couple things that enters when they draw a card. That's, I guess, technically the Champion of Wits kind of loots as well. But in the end, ends up giving you more card advantage than it does technically loot. I have the Extract Brain in here to where you're basically being able to look at your opponent's hand. Rot Absorption, which is that instants and sorceries to where they get exiled. Technically, I would count that as card advantage because you're then able to play those cards later. And then Arcane Endeavor, which may or may not be technically card advantage. It basically just gets you a free instant or sorcery on that one. So I may not have necessarily modified that. So I broke the removal down into destruction and exile. So you have 4 targeted destruction and 2. One is an actual board wipe. The other one is a conditional board wipe. But all of these, so you've got 6 cards that are either targeted or board wipe removal. Technically, that does include the unicorn, which is literally only enchantments. But everything else is either target permanents or non-artifact, non-black creature in the realm of Shriekmaw, so it is a little bit more restricted. But a decent destruction route. And then exile. Oh, sorry. And then the Clay Golem. I didn't pick that one up. So that's a target permanent as well. And then the exile suite, honestly, is unheard of. There are 8 cards in here that actually exile. Non-land permanent. So Vanish into Memory technically exiles the target creature, but it comes back. So honestly, I may put this in the miscellaneous category because I don't find much value in that card at all. But non-land permanent, target creature, permanent with mana value 4 or greater, creature or planeswalker. Cataclysmic Gearhulk, which is a pseudo board wipe in and of its own, but it's exiling those cards. And then Ashen Rider, which has that exile. I realize I flashed these cards and you can't even see them, so sorry about that. But Ashen Rider is that Archon that we started with up here. And then Plague Crafter is the sack outlet. So, and then pinks were just the oddballs that I really didn't have in any other thing. So Vanish into Memory, honestly, the Curator of Mysteries that, again, I mean, it scries, but only when you discard something. Lightning Greaves technically wasn't in any of my groups. Min, Wily Illusionist, again, I'm not sure why she's in this deck. With as few illusions that we have, or card draw, really, second card each turn. We had how many of those triggers? Actual card draw, we only had four cards. So you're not getting much in the way of boost off of that. And then the Wand of Orcus, which is the zombie wand that was kind of not too entirely great. It has to generate its own value out of that. And then Propaganda, which is your don't hit me card. So, overall, thoughts on this deck. Not having played it, I will stipulate that right now. I have not played it. Laggy has not played it. This is literally out of the box that I popped it open to actually do this analysis on the deck. I'm not a big fan. Short and sweet of it. I'm not a big blue player anyway. But out of the box, this just feels like it doesn't have the pieces that you want it to have for a cohesive deck. It has stuff that's often left field. It has stuff that is what would be termed cute in the fact that it's got stuff to where, oh, I can scry when I discard, or cycle a card. And I'm like, there's literally 2 cards in this deck that cycle, and 6 total cards to where they are wanting you to discard something. So I'm going to say right now that I'm not going to build this or modify this into the Sephris. I am going to run with Nihilor in this one. And try and make it into probably some sort of Steely deck. I'm going to have to look. I'm going to have to dig. I'm going to have to actually look into how that mechanic of stealing things for as long as they're on the battlefield. Just seeing how that interacts with and how that works in mechanic-wise, how we can abuse that, I guess. Because it's only when he enters the battlefield. Now, we can have that trigger and then run off of other cards. If we want to run that route, we can. The issue with that is a lot of the steal stuff is in red. A lot of it. So if we are going to steal stuff, then we probably want to have some sort of sacrifice suite in it. Because we technically want to grab it and then either kill it or have the option to kill it if our Nihilor is getting bounced or removed from the battlefield, so that the opponents don't get it back. So that is the Dungeons of Death. Here's the breakdown of it. Here's the curve. So it really is really heavy in the 3-drop slot. I will also say, I guess, another point. For Nihilor, if you were going to use this as the secondary commander or as the commander and throw Sephiroth in the 99, this specifically says when you do, or when it enters, tap one untapped creature you control, and you gain control of target creature that player controls with power less than or equal to the tapped creature's power. I'm going to tell you right now, the amount of creatures that have 4 or more power in this deck is like literally 8. If not less. Possibly less. So 5, 4, 4, 4, 5, 4, 4, 6, Sunblast. 9. There are 9 creatures that have power greater than, equal to, or greater than 4. So you're not grabbing much in the way of item or creatures from your opponents usually. And if you are, then they're probably a mana dork, or there's not really going to be much advantage to you having them, other than possibly removing a blocker, a chumper. Because yeah, there are 20 cards in this deck that hit the 3 CMC mark. But fairly even overall in symbols. Runs 39 land, which is massive comparatively. I'm just curious how much land I run in my... I run 43 in my lands deck. I run 37 in my big dudes deck. Okay, so 37. I guess it's not as massive as I thought it was. Okay. 39. So it is just a little bit higher than normal. But yeah. So that's just kind of the breakdown of that deck. Dungeons of Death. Alright. So that is Laggy's deck that I will play around with and experiment and rebuild for him.